There's a bit of a semi-autobiographical thing kind of seated in this story, which over the course of the years that it took from the first drawing of the mosquito to now in the show, I think I drew the mosquito in 2003, right after Newphonia was published. I started, you know, sketching this little mosquito character, and there were weird things happening in my real life, like parallel to this story. But I grew up with my father always playing jazz and classical records in the house. One of which was Sweet Emma's Preservation Hall album, and which incidentally the first song of which is Basin Street Blues. So this is a record that was always playing in the house, and at the time, I grew up in Vancouver, British Columbia as a child, and so you couldn't really get further from New Orleans as far as
yeah,
on the continent.
Yeah.
And but that said, like that music was just always playing, and to me, even I put it on, and it feels like I'm home, like in my childhood home, and so somehow it just got into my bloodstream, so to speak, just from hearing it so much. And then I remember after college when I'd signed my first record contract and I'm starting to tour around the world, my father said, "Hey, if you ever get to go to tour through New Orleans, like, book some time off and just spend some time just going to see the bands there." And my father, he's quite a quiet man in general, but so I do listen when he starts to. I have a little like nugget of wisdom for you, and I asked him why, and he said that when he was in college, he took a sort of he was again like a huge fan of jazz music, just listening and buying records and stuff, but when he was in college, he took a trip down to New Orleans and he went to see all the bands there, and Pres Hall, which I don't think has changed since the 50s as far as the actual room. There's all these amazing, musical ghosts and legends and mojo there. And so that record that I grew up listening to, he got from that trip, and he told me, he was like, that really was a paradigm shift for him. It was like a spiritual experience to see and hear that music being played live. And so on I think it was my first album, the tail end of Carpal Tunnel Syndrome, I was doing a tour, and I had a gig at I think House of Blues or something in New Orleans, and then I did what my dad said. I took a week off, and I just hung out in New Orleans and went to see as many bands as I could, and I went to Preservation Hall, where my dad went like a couple decades before. And it looked like it probably hadn't changed. I mean, I love the fact that there was no amplifiers or microphones or anything. Just musicians breathing into their instruments, like very much like this situation here. It's acoustically, you're just sharing that space and that music, and yeah, I was deeply moved by it. And they played Basin Street Blues, which just triggered everything all the way back to childhood for me. And I continued to go to different jazz clubs and for the rest of the week, and I noticed that every band played Basin Street Blues at one point during their set. So I was at the airport going to fly home, and just that music ringing in my head from a week of just experiencing it live and being really moved by it. And I said, look, I don't know what my next album's going to sound like, but I'm going to start with a turntable version of Basin Street Blues. And so that's all it took. Like, my real life experience is like, I'm going to go do this. And so I got home and I immediately started recording a version of Basin Street Blues. And I will say, I'll be the first to admit it's not actual jazz version, because to me, jazz is played live by a bunch of people playing off of each other, you know, in real time. But it was just me. So it was more like a study. And I did, you know, the chord cycles were laid out. And then I remember, you know, trying to find a long note, a held, sustained note, like off a classical record of a clarinet or something. And then I put that on the turntable and I bent it into the Basin Street Blues melody, or just play around the chords. And then I would scratch in, you know, every hit of the upright bass. Yeah, so it was like a kind of a laboratory version. It took me weeks to finish this version, but in the end, like what you'll hear is, every instrument is played on turntables, just one note off one sound, like maybe an upright bass, like boom, and then bent on the turntable and scratched to do the walking bass line. And it took me just weeks to just even learn how to do that physically, like, but then to arrange every layer of, you know, the trombone and the clarinet and what have you, just have them like play around without it landing on the same note, just kind of staying out of each other's way, you know.
Yeah.
As you do, you would hear a jazz ensemble do if they're improvising. So I finished that track, and then my cousin, his name, well, he goes by Monkmas. He did this beautiful animated video for it. And I just put that on YouTube. It was part of the release of the album. And several months later, I get a call from Preservation Hall, which was very strange. I didn't believe it when my manager said, we just got a call from the musical director at Preservation Hall, Ben Jaffe. And he wants to invite you down to play at Preservation Hall. And I said, what are you talking about? It's Preservation Hall. It's trad jazz. What's that got to do with turntables, you know, like, and he wants to speak to you on the phone, and so I call, I'm like, hey, you know, it's great to meet you, you know, and I'm honored, but I was kind of fighting it as an idea. I felt like very much an outsider, because I was like, I'm a scratch DJ, I've been doing it since I was 12, I practice it every day, that's the thing, but I'll be the first to admit this is not a jazz version, this is a turntable study of that. But regardless, he said, no, but I think that you've touched on something that's very like core. Just even in the video that my cousin made, and the style of music, and you know, the style of the phrases and voices. He heard something. He's like, "There's a kinship here, and I want you to bring it down to the hall and just show people how you do it, right?" So I was just pinching myself the whole time. Like, I couldn't believe it. I called my dad. I said, I got invited to play at Preservation Hall. And he's like, what? and we went down as myself, my wife, my manager. And we went down to the hall, and they had set up this little pull down, you know, like a slide projector screen for home movies or something. And I said, what's that doing there? He's like, oh, we want to show your video to start this set. And I said, what? And they start playing my cousin's animated video, and I'm watching it, and you know, it's full. It's a full house. By that I mean, I think there's 80 people or something in there, and they're watching this version of Basin Street Blues, and I'm like, oh, this is just cool that it's here. And then at the tail end of the video, the band start walking in, and they are playing over my version.
Far out. And
they take it up. You know, they continue it. I was literally just crying.
No doubt. Man,
I was just like, can't even believe this is happening. And then so they invited me on stage to play with them, and they were doing, you know, a lot of standards or something. Like, I'll go over it, you know, rocking chair and whatever key, and then 3, 4, and then you're on, you know.
Yeah.
But I knew all the tunes, and I was just sort of trying to keep up with them, really. So that, to me, the Story of a Mosquito has a bit of that. Like, you're just trying to keep up with these super heavies, you know. And I remember just, you know, trading bars with Charlie Gabriel, and it's like, you sort of throw something at me, and I'd have to respond or try to at least match what he's doing on the turntable. And I remember just, in 32 bars, like literally learning more about music, live music, playing live music than I had from 10 years of just DJing alone on stage.